Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Today's February 17th, and we are looking at the first of two women to die under the dubious care of Dr. John Biskind. Lisa was 26 years old and 20 weeks and 6 days pregnant when she went to A to Z Women's Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona on February 16th of 1995. She was to undergo an abortion at the hands of Dr. John Biskind. Now, the young woman might have thought twice about entrusting herself to Biskind's care if she had known that he had very nearly killed an abortion patient in 1991. Biskind had put a 2-inch hole in the woman's uterus. An hour later, a clinic nurse was unable to measure blood pressure, but Biskind had left the clinic before his patient had been medically cleared, and he didn't respond to his pager or cell phone. Fortunately for the patient, the nurse called 911. Medics arrived and transported the 41-year-old woman across the street to Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center, where an emergency hysterectomy was performed to save her life. Now, the medical board found out about the woman's near-fatal experience when the hospital filed a complaint against the clinic's owner, Dr. Moshe Hakimovich. This guy was a piece of work. He was disciplined for the abortion deaths of Christina Goswine, Tanya Williamson, and Luz Rodriguez, and owned the clinic where Jamie Garcia underwent her fatal abortion. So he isn't exactly running the best facilities, is he? In a 6-month period, that emergency room had treated 4 of Biskind's patients, leaving hospital staff to be very concerned about the care the women were receiving. But the medical board, on the other hand, did not seem particularly concerned and took exactly 0 action. So, what happened to Lisa at the clinic? Biskind documented that he inserted 5 laminaria to dilate her cervix. A pre-printed consent form that Lisa signed said that she would stay within 5 miles or 15 minutes from the facility, and a handwritten note on the page added, "Patient stated during counseling she would stay overnight in Phoenix within 15 minutes of our clinic." So, you read that right. Biskind, like others who perform abortions late in pregnancy, endangered his patients by just sending them out the door under their own fragile care or the care of a loved one, when it's not safe for them to be more than 15 minutes away. Seems kind of irresponsible to me, but then I'm not pro-choice, so I take a very different view toward endangering women while you're killing their babies. An undated pre-printed surgical report did not note how much cervical dilation Biskind had achieved for his patient. It does note that she entered the OR at 10:33 a.m., was administered a selection of drugs at 10:26, more drugs at 10:47, and taken to the recovery room at 11 o'clock, still unconscious. And also, the pre-printed operative note isn't specific to the patient. It just said uterine contents consisted of placental tissue and products of conception. The patient tolerated the procedure well and left the operating room for recovery in good condition. So it's pre-printed how well the abortion went. Pre-printed. This is kind of like the case at Crash in New York, where they documented a dead patient as pink alert responsive because they did the surgical notes before the abortion. So, shouldn't be really surprising. So, just half an hour after she was moved to the recovery room at 11 o'clock, Lisa was discharged from the facility, even though her blood pressure and pulse had fallen since she had entered the recovery room. Biskind felt no need to medically clear his patient before sending her home, even though he had very nearly killed a patient just a few years earlier. He told the medical board, "My experience has given me the ability to feel secure. I used to see all second-try patients, but it just wasn't necessary." Just wasn't necessary. He had already ignored a 2-inch hole in a woman's uterus. She very nearly died, but it wasn't necessary to check on them. There are no indications of whether Lisa was actually told to stay near the facility after the abortion itself. The instructions that were mentioned in everything I looked at just said she was to stay near the facility for the dilation prior to the procedure. Now, Lisa and her boyfriend didn't feel like they could afford a hotel in Phoenix, so they decided to go home to Flagstaff. On the way, Lisa took ill, so she and the boyfriend stopped at a motel in Camp Verde. Lisa hoped that if she rested, she'd feel better, but the pain worsened and she began suffering shortness of breath, and her boyfriend called 911. Lisa was taken to a hospital in Cottonwood, where she was pronounced dead at 4:55 p.m. on February 17th. An autopsy found a laceration in her uterus over 3 inches long and 2,000 cc's, which is over half a gallon of blood in her abdomen. The cause of death was intra-abdominal hemorrhage secondary to perforation of uterus secondary to pregnancy termination. So basically just slashed a 3-inch hole in her uterus. Don't need to check on her. Lisa's father, Curtis Skip Bardsley, told the Arizona Daily Sun, "I can't tell you how many times I thought about just going to Phoenix and doing this guy." Hold on, I need to fix a typo. But he would think of his other children and just try to pursue justice through the medical board and the courts. But he even moved from his home in California to Flagstaff to pursue this. He settled a lawsuit against Biskind for an undisclosed amount and tried to get the medical board to take some kind of action. "I couldn't take it. I had to be here for this thing. It took 3 years to get anything done at all to this guy," said Skip, who sat in on the medical board proceedings as an observer. But all that happened was that Biskind was censured. No steps were taken to protect women. Biskind told the medical board that he told Lisa not to leave the area for 48 hours, so I guess it was her own fault she bled to death from the 3-inch hole he'd ripped in her uterus. And considering how lackadaisical he was about taking women to the hospital, staying near the facility probably would not have done Lisa any good. In fact, staying in the facility might not have done Lisa any good when you find out what happened 3 years later. Luann Herron, a 33-year-old woman, also made the mistake of trusting Biskind with her life. Like Lisa, Luann suffered a tear in her uterus. And as with Lisa, Biskind paid no attention to signs that his patient was hemorrhaging. In fact, he left the clinic and left Luann, who was again showing signs of hemorrhaging, in the supervision of some medical assistants. The staff just mopped her blood off the floor as her life drained away. By the time anybody called medics to take her across the street to the hospital, it was too late to save her. Now, Skip followed the prosecution for Luann's death because finally somebody did crack down on this guy. And after Biskind was found guilty, Skip pushed for the maximum sentence. And Luann's father also sued the medical board for letting Biskind get away with what he'd done to Lisa. The suit alleged that the board had prepared its finding of fact in law before they'd even held a hearing. So I'll get some final words from Lisa's father. Lisa had worked as a canyoneer and a rancher at Phantom Ranch, where she did cooking, cleaning, greeting guests, and other odd jobs. Skip told the Arizona Sun that he'd had his daughter's remains cremated. "I took her down to the Grand Canyon and spread her because that's where she worked and she loved that place. I'm going down to the Grand Canyon tomorrow. I hike down every year at her birthday and celebrate it with her."